Welcome to The Explainer. So, let's talk about what happens after the big courtroom showdown. You won. But how do you actually get the money you're owed?
It's a spot most of us never really consider. You've got that court judgment in your hand, this official piece of paper that says, yep, you're legally owed money. But here's the thing. That judgment, it's just paper. It doesn't, magically make money appear in your bank account. So the real question is, how do you turn that promise into actual cash? All right, so first things first. You have to understand this process is anything but automatic. The court isn't going to just step in and do it for you. Nope. You, the winner, you're the one who has to get the ball rolling. And to get that ball rolling, you need something called an executory instrument. Honestly, the best way to think about it is like a key. An official court-stamped key that unlocks the entire enforcement process. It basically turns your judgment from just a ruling into a real, powerful tool that lets you take action. And let me be clear, without this key, you're going nowhere.
Okay, so once you have that key, the first few steps are pretty straightforward. You file a formal request with the court to start the enforcement. You attach that all-important executory instrument to it. Then an execution judge takes a look, and if everything's in order, they give you the green light. It's only then that the real process, the actual collection, can kick off.
So you've got the judge's go-ahead. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The law doesn't just have one way of doing things. It gives you two totally different strategies for enforcement. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all deal.
And these two paths, they're really built on two different philosophies. On one hand, you have direct enforcement, which is all about putting pressure on the person to make them comply. On the other hand, you've got indirect enforcement. This one kind of bypasses the person and goes straight for their stuff, their assets, their property, their money. Let's dig into that first path, the direct one. So the court can start with financial pressure, hitting them with a pretty hefty fine. If that doesn't get their attention, things can escalate to detention. We're talking actual jail time until they comply. You see this a lot in really sensitive cases, like child custody disputes. And then, as a total last resort, the court can authorize physical force to see the judgment through, like in an eviction. These are, no joke, very powerful and very serious tools.
But, using that kind of direct force on a person, it's actually not that common when it's just about money. Way more often, the law goes down that second path, targeting the debtor's assets. And this is where, for the person who's owed money, it kind of turns into a legal treasure hunt.
Right, because think about it, you can't collect from assets that aren't there anymore, right? If they've been hidden or sold or moved. So the number one priority becomes finding and then locking down the debtor's property. And the law actually has a whole toolkit designed to do just that. Tool number one in this kit is all about speed. It's called a precautionary seizure. So if you, the creditor, think the debtor is about to sell off their property or empty a bank account, you can ask a judge to freeze those assets instantly. But, and this is a big but, there's a catch. You then have just 8 days to file a full-blown lawsuit to prove your claim is legit and justify that freeze. So yeah, it's powerful, but it's really meant to be a quick, temporary fix. But what happens when the asset isn't just cash in a bank? What if it's something complicated, like a functioning business or a building with tenants? Well, that's where judicial custody comes into play. In this case, the court appoints a neutral third party, kind of like a guardian, to step in and manage it. Their job isn't just to freeze it, it's to actually preserve its value. Keep the business running, collect the rent, so it doesn't fall apart while the legal fight is going on. And just to show you how serious this can get, check this out. If there's a real worry that the debtor is a flight risk, that they might just leave the country to avoid paying, the creditor can actually ask a judge for a travel ban. The court can literally stop that person from leaving the country until the debt is paid or the issue is sorted out. That's a major restriction of personal freedom, and it's all in the name of making sure a financial promise is kept.
Okay, so the assets are secured, they're locked down, but you can't pay your bills with a car or a plot of land, right? They have to be turned into actual cash. And that's where this whole process moves to a very public, very traditional stage, the auction block.
In a judicial auction isn't just some free-for-all, it's a super structured event. First, an expert comes in to value the property to set a fair starting price.
Next, the auction gets advertised publicly because you want as many potential buyers as possible. Then, to make sure only serious people show up, bidders have to put down a deposit, usually about 10%. And finally, the auction itself happens. The highest bidder pays up, and the sale is done. Now, here's a really fascinating little detail that's baked right into the law to keep things fair. The system has these super strict rules about who can't participate. The judges involved in the case, the court employees, even the lawyers for both sides. They are all totally forbidden from bidding at the action. It's all about making sure the process is transparent and that insiders can't game the system.
So the auction's over, the property's sold, and now there's a pile of cash sitting with the court. This brings us to the final, and maybe the most crucial step of all, figuring out who gets paid. How do they divide up the money? And more importantly, who's first in line?
Yeah, it's not just a free-for-all, first-come, first-served kind of thing. Not at all. There's a really strict legal hierarchy, a pecking order, if you will. First up, the costs of the whole process get paid. You know, the court fees, the auction costs, all that. After that comes priority debts, stuff that the law sees as extra important, like alimony or child support. Then you have your secured creditors, like a bank that holds a mortgage. And only after all of those guys are paid in full do the other creditors, the unsecured ones, get a crack at what's left.
And it's important to remember, this whole system is about settling debts, not about punishing someone. So what if the auction actually brings in more money than the total amount that's owed? Well, that extra cash doesn't just get kept by the court or the creditors. Nope. Any surplus goes right back to the person who originally owned the property.
So there you have it, from a simple piece of paper, a judgment, all the way through this incredibly complex process of seizures and auctions and payments. It's a whole legal machine, really, built with checks and balances and a whole lot of power. And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to chew on. What does it say about a society, about our ideas of justice and trust, when it takes such a powerful and complicated machine just to make sure a simple promise is kept?